Welcome to the Panographers. Today we sit down with award-winning producer, writer, director, and CEO of Liquid Cinema, Thomas Wallner. We discuss his early cinematic spatial filmmaking career and the catalysts behind his development of an entirely new lexicon of authoring tools for immersive media storytellers. I'm here with the wonderful Thomas Wallner from Liquid Cinema in Toronto, coming out of Toronto, Canada. And we're in beautiful, sunny Venice Beach, California. So can you tell us about how you got into this industry, into spatial video and cinematic 360 video?
Yeah, I've been a filmmaker for many years, a narrative filmmaker, mainly working in feature-length documentaries. So I would say I'm a consummate storyteller. And in 2012, I had the opportunity, as part of a television series on the Arctic, to shoot an immersive film. And this was like 2012, so
yeah,
a while back.
Before VR was VR.
Before
it was still called panoramic photography at that. Panoramic videography.
That's right. And to me, it just seemed really intriguing to be able to capture a place like the Arctic in a way that we could experience this. This was before the DK1 even, so it was really for the flat screen. But I always like to say that during this project, it's sort of like we started on a steam train and ended up on a bullet train because the project took a while. It meant the VR headsets came in, and then there was that first moment of exposure where you're taking, that 360 scene that you shot, literally standing by a glacier in Greenland, and then seeing it on the headset. And that, for me, was a huge moment. A moment that many people have had where they go, wow, this is going to be a stunning new medium.
Absolutely.
And I guess at the same time, I immediately grew frustrated with the medium because it looked crappy. Yeah. And most of all, I was used to, as a filmmaker, having a frame to work with so that I could direct attention. And what happened here is that it was taken away from me, and I resented that.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people have complained about that, but no one's actually done anything about it.
Yes, it's true.
And so we decided to do something about it. So even back in 2013, by the time we were completing the project, we invented a technique called forced perspective. And I love saying in a sort of inflammatory way that we brought the frame back into the medium because it drives people crazy. They're like, frame, this medium shouldn't have a frame. How can you put a frame? And it's not, it's sort of a soft frame, It's like, and just to make it more controversial, I called it forced perspective, as if we're turning your head in a particular way. And of course we're not. And in fact, we've used it for years, and it's so organic and seamless that people didn't actually know that it's being used and that it's happening. They just happened to see the thing that the director wanted them to see. So that set us on a journey to creating a tool set in general for filmmakers and for this medium, because this was all lovely hand-coded at the time, and of course you can't do that. That's not scalable. So we set out to raise some money for something we call Liquid Cinema. And our desire was really to create a software that opened up a dialogue on the language of the medium and allowed filmmakers to use it to also use the medium in an effective way. And I actually believe, it's a self-serving belief, but I believe that what we invented here or made available in the tool set is the missing link in the medium in order to actually make it usable for narrative use, to actually turn it into a medium rather than a novelty.
So I've seen you speak in public on several occasions, and one of the things that really always spoke to me was how you compared sort of your knowledge of traditional filmmaking techniques and all the benefits of that you get from traditional filmmaking techniques compared to sort of this open, new, brave new world of VR, and sort of the disparity between the two fields, and how before filmmakers were filmmakers, they worked in the theater. Right, so they were bringing their theater background into film, and we're now filmmakers trying to bring our film expertise into VR, which is something entirely, fully unexplored yet.
Yeah, that's right.
And then I also, one of the things that I've heard you speak about in the past was sort of like when film first came about in these festivals, these grand fairs in Paris in the early 1900s, how there were people who had already built these like Google Jump like cameras, who had already built aerial panoramic photography or videography or filmography, I should say, because it's film. And they were exhibiting these things as their vision of what film would be.
In the future.
And somehow we got locked in the frame for 100 years. On film.
Yeah.
And now finally it's all kind of come full circle, and we have all the technology to make it what these folks envisioned it actually becoming.
Yeah.
But now that we're here, we don't entirely know what to do with it yet.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, they didn't know what to do with it in their time either. Yeah. I think, it opens up a really interesting discussion. There is sort of technological progress, which opens new possibilities by virtue of a technology arriving, like VR, like 360 video, like the capture technology and all of that. And most of the time, people are really, really busy figuring out how to use the technology. It's usually difficult because you're just wrangling with the medium, and so you're actually super focused on the technology itself. And what can happen very easily, and it's happened to me too, is that in the struggle with the medium and its processes, because it's so new, you sort of park the discussion of the bigger problems somewhere else, and you kind of deal with them once you actually get the picture on the screen. But and then sometimes you end up never dealing with it, and that's kind of what I see. What I see is, and it's a brutal way to say it, I see a laziness around an acceptance of an aesthetic that for immersive video that is incomplete. So, but now we have arrived at this point. Yes, the image quality still needs to improve, but we have arrived at this point where it's no longer a struggle to put those images into a headset, and it's high time we deal with the grammar of the medium. Because it has to be harnessed in a way that it can be used for storytellers. There are people have turned away from this medium, and I'm talking about creators. Directors who were like really excited about it, and I'm still excited about it. And maybe like you, we're sort of not looking at the present state of the image quality. We can sort of look past that. That'll come. It'll be 3D, 360, 6 off. It'll be good image quality. But the problems that we need to solve around how people view this medium and how storytellers utilize it, we can solve right now. We don't have to wait for all of that to arrive. And that's what I'm really, really interested in. What you said made me think of something else that I wanted to say. We live in a world where the non-linear is a total possibility. And that sort of the viewer is now part of media in terms of being able to interact with it and influencing it, and that's very satisfying. It is at odds sometimes with how stories are told, and I think the part that makes it hard for traditional filmmakers is that the moment they try to think about traditional linear narrative and bring it into this new medium, which I will say is one of the hardest disciplines to do, they're often discouraged by saying, oh, well, that's old thinking, and you're old, and you're used to telling stories in a certain way, so naturally you want to bring it to this new medium. And I can say for myself that I do not fall into this traditional camp. I've done interactive experiences that were crazy and non-linear, but I've chosen to put on blinders to exclude all the interactive possibilities, to actually really focus on the core problem, which is we have a pictorial temporal medium here, i.e. video. It records moments in time. People will want it to tell a story. It's going to be a demand. It's like, come on, this is cool. You take me to a place, now tell me a story. And so, it's really about solving those problems, and that's sort of what I'm really committed to doing. And I think we've solved some of them. So, when you're tackling a new medium, it's a really great time to reflect on the old medium and how it works, because we take it for granted, right? Our montage or cuts, the way we shoot, we don't think about it. It's so fluid now after 100 years of filmmaking that we rarely have to think about this. But if you're now exploring a new medium, it's good to step back and see how the old one actually works, also like cognitively, aesthetically, and so forth. In that process, I've spent a good amount of time looking back into the history of film and how it evolved. So if you look back at the first examples of films, which were like these rotating cylinders, people already had a vision of what they thought the cinema of the future would look like. And you can read this. And it is not a flat screen it's not a flat screen.
Yeah.
It's actually basically the holodeck. That's what they describe around 1900.
Yeah.
And if you look at I like to call them our steampunk cinematic forebearers.
Yeah.
Because that's all they had. They had
Yeah.
metal and celluloid and,
Yeah.
it was all chemistry and steel.
Yeah.
They already did things that were immersive. So at the Paris exhibition of 1900, and it's kind of funny if you find the pictures, if you look at the Google Jump camera and the projector they used, I mean, just look at these two things. Look how similar they are. It's really quite staggering. And it kind of means the idea was there already, that this medium would envelop you. And, we think we're so cool doing AR and mixed reality and all that. Well, they already did it. So, I mean, in 1900, a bunch of guys got like a steel construction together that they could stand on with synchronized film cameras on it, rode a balloon over Paris, and then built this incredible projection hall, like a dome projection, put a hot air balloon in that people could get in and feel like they were flying over Paris.
Brilliant.
So the idea was already there.
Yeah.
And you were saying earlier that, we kind of got locked into that frame. And that's sort of what we had. And I think that has two reasons. One, technology, that was available at the time and more readily applicable. But also because I think the two-dimensional screen really speaks to our cognitive process. The vocabulary of film is like the vocabulary of dreams.
Absolutely.
And it has a certain logic that plays out very well on the 2D screen. And the challenge is, how can we get that dreamlike language into immersive media?
It's also interesting to think about how much film and television has affected your own perception of your own dreams. Meaning, we have there's a canon, there's a language to filmmaking that we almost subconsciously ingest.
Yes.
That actually probably affects how we think, right?
Yes.
I mean, you speak multiple languages.
Yeah.
We sometimes think in our languages that we know internally. We have this inner dialogue, and you can hear your voice in your particular language you've learned in your mind. So if you think you've learned that language, then what are all the other languages that you've learned that you are internalizing?
Yes. And what's up for discussion? I have an opinion on this, but it's up for discussion whether the language of film was something we created or something that we discovered. I.e. that our brain already knew how it would need, or our brain was constructed in a certain way to process filmic images and cuts into a narrative based on fragments, just like human language and words in a novel. And that filmmakers didn't really invent it, they discovered what would work with the brain. And so I believe there is a hidden language for immersive film that we need to discover. That will help our brain create experiences that are narratively meaningful.
I couldn't agree with you more, first of all. And what's exciting is that your company, Liquid Cinema, is just, you've tackled some of the inherent issues, which was, what do you do when you have a frameless environment? How do you, like you mentioned earlier, how do you make sure that you force the perspective on the protagonist that's in the scene, so that if they're coming down a hallway and you're looking over here, you don't miss this important moment in the scene.
Yeah.
But then also, how do you re-inject the cut, the magic that cuts give you in traditional film into the 360 environment? Because in the 360 environment, instead of having this movement through time, you feel like you have just a movement through space. Like, I'm here now on this bench, and now when we cut, we're on top of the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
And we're in a new environment, but it's hard to for us to relate fully spherical spaces between each other.
Yes.
As much as it is for our brain to cognitively digest, it cuts much quicker on standard frame.
And you know what it is? I mean, what is the purpose of montage in film? The purpose of montage is to condense time and space and to have images collide with each other through the process of juxtaposition to create a meaning that's not even in the images themselves.
Yes.
That classic thing, person looking at a soup, cut to the soup in the face, they're hungry. If you replace the soup with, a dead person in a casket, they look sad.
Yes.
We feel sadness, but it's actually not in the footage. The hard part about immersive film is you're actually changing locations.
Yes.
Like, just like you said, it's not the collision of images, it's actually a transportational thing. And that sort of robs filmmakers of one of the most important, powerful parts of film.
Yeah.
To create meaning through juxtaposition. But you gain other. Just to give you an example, there's this wonderful film called Seven Miracles, and I thought it was quite audacious because here's somebody who actually made a full-length feature film about the life of Jesus in 7 chapters around the miracles of Jesus. And he really approached it like a movie, with various scenes and shots. And I'd have to look up his last name. It's Rodrigo.
You just showed it to us in the cafe.
Yeah. You know what? Rodrigo. I'll say Rodrigo. You can key in his full name or something.
Yeah.
Or if you use the footage, you'll
put it over the
footage. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So when the director Rodrigo made this film, he noticed that there were certain situations where he had done as much as he could do to direct the audience attention through a mise-en-scène, to do things in the environment to make sure that the audience was looking at the right thing. So let's consider the opening shot of his movie for a second. The opening shot, you see a bunch of people coming through an ancient tunnel towards you. In it, he places an apostle who is going to be the narrator of the entire story. The apostle walks up to the camera. The only problem is that the other people walk by you, and because you're curious about where they're going, you turn around to see where they're going. And in fact, where they're going is quite compelling because the person at the front is holding a torch, which is beautifully silhouetting everyone, so you're like enjoying the shot. But then you hear a voice, and you're totally confused. That's because Rodrigo had actually given the apostle darker clothing in the hope that you would stay on that person because they stand out of the crowd, but many times they completely don't. So in this case, you're confused. So our technique of forced perspective actually does something where it checks if you're actually seeing him in the middle of the scene, i.e. you're looking at him. And if you're not, it'll cut and create a satisfying cut to show you the apostle.
Brilliant.
Right?
That's amazing.
And if you're already looking at him, there's no cut.
And what do you call that when...
We call that conditional forced perspective, using something called exclusion zones.
Exclusion zones, that's right. And you showed this to me earlier, where it's sort of like you draw sort of a degree, a field of exclusion zones.
So if you look at the scene inside our authoring tool, you will see the scene, and then I can set a forced perspective on it. And now I can actually add sort of a red area around this forced perspective, and if the viewer is looking anywhere in this red area, the forced perspective is not executed.
Wow.
And it's really simple, actually, but what it does to the medium is huge. It basically changes the medium. I'm going to go so far to say that it's actually the missing link or the key to make this medium narratively useful. And I think this technique will become, if this medium is going to grow and go anywhere, it will become a permanent part of the vocabulary. It has to, because it's missing.
It absolutely has to, yeah. I mean, in liquid cinema, you guys have solved some other issues too, right? You've got international translation in there.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So, we started with the sort of, I'd like to say we've been developing this at great expense for many years. And it's a painstaking, slow process because there's a lot of detail in it. And I call it, we've been eating our greens, building the foundation and the platform to make all of this work. And it's really not trivial, I can tell you that. But we wanted to be able to do things that we all take for granted in a regular film, but things that are necessary. So for instance, if you have titling, if you're giving a title, like if we put a title on you right now.
Panographers.
That's right. The thing is, it might be good if that was gaze-based. Yeah. So if I'm looking into a certain part of a film and I look into sky, it means the title will appear magically there as if it was always meant to be. And the viewer doesn't even know that. We call that pin to gaze. Doesn't mean it's following you, it just gets pinned to the sphere where you're looking, and then it's like this permanent object there. So you really, what it means is we have a metadata-driven player that takes the graphical layer and renders it live based on your gaze and your behavior in the movie at the time of playback. And that's a radical departure from having regular 360 players where everything is just burnt into the sphere and baked in, where none of that has interactivity. And of course, if you're dealing with graphics that are metadata based, that are live rendered, there's a lot of advantages. One, you can place them pleasingly in 3D space. They're not in the video sphere.
Yeah.
It means because it's metadata, we have a completely multilingual workflow that graphic can just be there in 10 different languages, and our whole content management system just supports that. So in seconds, you can add languages to a project that's already live.
So it's important to sort of reiterate that, and this is one of the painstaking processes that my production studio incurs almost daily, is that we have to re-render if there's a change in a sequence.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do pictures. We'll do an overlay of an image, and then find out a week later that image has to be swapped out. The whole project has to get re-rendered.
Yeah, what happens, and it can take up to 3 days, and to republish it, render it
across all the platforms,
transcode it again. Put it. I mean, I always joke, like I had a project once where there was a graphic, and that's earlier in the days before we had these tools, and the client said, "Oh, could you just move that graphic over, a couple pixels to the right?" And you're like, "Okay, yes, client, you're paying the bill, so I'm doing that, And then you show it to them like 2 days later, and they meant, "Oh, actually, I meant the other way," right? Now I can just get on the phone, move the graphic, hit update, they will see it immediately. Yeah. And this could be a live project. Or, I don't know if this has happened to you, but sometimes we make mistakes. We spell somebody's name wrong in the title, or the logo is the old logo, or something has changed. Well, we can change this in seconds. So it really saves time and money. Like it bundles all the advantages together. And
yeah, so it's sort of we wouldn't call Liquid Cinema an editor, so to speak, more like a scaffolding to create an environment to make your already published, rendered out footage more immersive.
That is correct.
Right? Would that be the...
Yes.
It's sort of like a non-destructive publishing tool.
We call it an authoring tool for that reason.
Non-destructive authoring tool.
So your edits and your editing, you will just do in your favorite nonlinear editing system, whether it's Premiere or... We really don't care. You just have to drop a 2:1 aspect ratio MP4 file in there, and it's just a proxy file. That doesn't even get published. So you can do this before you've finished, let's say, the sound mix and the final stitch. You can already do all of that.
Fantastic.
Because that video is just sort of a placeholder for the final video that you're going to publish. And actually, the authoring part is the fastest part of this whole process. It's pretty intuitive. So, if you know how to stitch and do all of that, this is easy compared to that.
Yeah. Thank God. Thank you. So you also, I think I saw you present Cave of Forgotten Dreams.
Oh,
Werner.
Yeah. He did this beautiful film called Cave of Forgotten Dreams. Yeah. There was this, what you saw was something that we experimented with. And what I wanted to experiment with is there a way to create a smooth transition from watching a regular film in VR on a virtual screen, in this case, The Cave of Forgotten Dreams, which is a 360 3D film that you see as 360 3D and in VR. And this film is about a cave in France where you see some of the early drawings of humankind on the walls.
Yeah. I think it was also famous for the first use of small drones inside of a cave to scan the interior of a cave for a cinematic film.
It was. I don't think Herzog did that. That was done by somebody else later.
Okay.
But that cave seems to, for obvious reasons, attract interesting forms of new media. So what I wanted to do was, in Herzog's film, he's narrating it and the music's going. And there's actually, in the original film, there's a scientist by a monitor showing us the point cloud of the cave. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we just slipped into the point cloud of the cave as a 360 3D out of the film that we're watching? I call this technique switching, this idea of switching one type of medium for the other, but trying to make that transition as seamless as possible. Because I do believe that there is a place for different forms of media to work together in one kind of story experience. And so what happens is you look at the 3D film on the flat screen, and then you have a cut to the point cloud, which is also a 3D 360 video. But what we do is we constrain it in the frame that the traditional film was running so that your brain basically thinks, oh, this is just the next cut. But then we extrude it, explode that scene beyond the frame, and it surrounds you. So you're kind of falling into it, and because you're hearing the audio and the music of the entire film, it becomes one seamless experience.
Beautiful.
And then, of course, the challenge is now your audience is in the 3D 360 point cloud. They can look anywhere they would like to, but you kind of want to bring them, at least in this experiment, you want to bring them back to the screen. So what we do is we just take away the light on the sides of the 360 and we collapse it back on the screen, and because people follow the light, they sort of naturally gravitate back to the film. It's really organic, and it's really nice, actually.
And I suppose you could also add a forced perspective into that as well.
You could, if you needed to. But it's kind of sort of happens naturally. In this case, you might want to avoid it.
You'd almost want it to be organically.
You do.
Ideally, you don't want to use forced perspective unless it's used for a narrative break to feel like you're seeing a new transition.
Yes,
or that you really need someone to actually be focusing on a specific point. I think you also showed an example where it was a high altitude weather balloon. Was that?
Oh, The Edge of Space.
The Edge of Space.
Yeah, and done together with Jürgen Gerritz at Concept VR.
My old buddy who he and I worked on a project together when we were first starting off our careers, so we go way back. But that particular project, there was a lot of ancillary things to look at that weren't that interesting, right?
That's right.
Then I think that's an inherent dilemma with composition in 360 video or spatial videos, that you can choose a location where anywhere you look there's something interesting, but there's also plenty of situations where you really only need to be looking forward or directly behind you, and everything in between is really extraneous.
When we all started, I know we all did this. We all tried really hard to create scenes where everything is around you, so there's reasons to look around.
Yeah.
And I think, by the way, I think that's still a good, like some scenes lend themselves to that.
Yeah.
Where the problem arises is when you are in a scene that has no focus, but it's just really, truly beautiful to look around in and experience. But then you cut to a scene that has a particular focus, where the part that, let's say it's a piano player on a piano in an empty hall. Well, when you come into that scene, you want to see the piano player, but because the scene beforehand didn't have any focus, you might be looking in the direction that when the cut happens, you're looking at an empty hall and you're totally confused.
Yeah.
So in those moments, forced perspective is essential, because no matter where you looked in that landscape before, when you come into that scene, you'll see the piano player. And my experience has been that when filmmakers suddenly have this technique in their hands, they do not want to go back to a world where they don't have that possibility.
Yeah.
Because it's optional, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to use it.
I love the idea of being able to shoot with multiple different mediums and then bring it all together in one place. And have a truly multimedia experience. I think that one of the questions I want to ask you is sort of where do you feel like our medium is going, and where do you think it needs to be? Where do you think it needs to go? Personally, I think that the clients that we work with, 4 years ago, they were jumping over the table. They couldn't get enough of just standard 360 video. Now they're sort of like, okay, we've seen that, we've been there, we've done that. What is the next iteration? What's the next evolution of this medium?
I think it's a sort of a multi-layered answer. I think there's storytellers, and there's also people who use immersive video for all kinds of good reasons. That can be in training, it can be in education. And I think those forms of immersive video are going to be more interactive, so that you're taken to a place, but there's another context given to you. Like, we've evolved a picture-in-picture function, for instance, in liquid cinema, which means there might be sort of a second layer of commentary on the thing you're seeing, which is it's not about reality being there literally, but being able to interact with things to give it a greater context. I think, actually, I believe and I hope, but I think this will happen. I think we're at a moment where the sort of technical flaws of the medium are holding it back. So the moment you have higher resolution images, You have 3D 360 with a bit of movement, so you get parallax, and
Yeah.
it's going to be a different medium.
Yeah.
And then I think the filmic aspect of it is going to come back more. And what I think I'm seeing right now is more finding the exact uses for this medium, as I talked about just now, and they need to be more interactive.
Yeah.
And because it makes it fun and it makes it interesting. But it's a different use of it as a storytelling medium.
Yeah, I think right now people think that it's sort of like it's sort of like a GoPro action cam on steroids, where people will typically just take it out and film an experience, like surfing or climbing the top of the mountain. But there's no narrative other than like here. It's almost like a glorified Instagram. Like here I am. Yeah. Look around me.
And there's a place for that as well.
Yeah, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it's like, in order for our medium to remain a viable, a viable industry for 360 filmmakers, right? Their clients also need to have a say on, if you're trying to fund a spatial video film, and all their funding sources are no longer interested in 360 video, well, then that's a problem.
Yes.
So it's like, so we need to also show our, the people that provide the funds to make these films, what our next iteration of the technology is.
Well, I think where I'm seeing interest, and I don't know how it is in your world, but we're seeing interest in clients who want to transport people somewhere in order to teach them something. I've heard of projects that are about sexual harassment in the workplace, interviewing techniques, we're working with a company that does recruitment in the Canadian North, where they get indigenous people to go to other parts of Canada to work, let's say in mines and things like that. It's a very expensive process. But by showing them what it's like in a mine, that person can say, well, no, that's not for me. I'm not doing this. And they just save $50,000 because they didn't bring that person down and then realize that they were claustrophobic, as an example. Yeah, so those are really good uses of the medium in very specific ways. And I don't think that denigrates the medium. Like, film is used for everything. Right? And so I think in the short term, we're going to see these enterprise uses that people will see benefits in. And as the medium gets better qualitatively, it's going to drift back into the film realm as well for storytellers. And I think we just all need to hack away at it. I don't feel discouraged in any way, because I think we're also sort of looking towards the future, but not in the hype sense, but in seeing what that mature medium is going to look like. And with Liquid Cinema, we just kind of want to be a part of that journey.
Absolutely. So I know you have an airplane to catch.
I do, yeah.
So we'll kind of leave it at this for now. Maybe we can do a part 2.
Okay, sounds good.
Thomas, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Where can our viewers find Liquid Cinema?
Yeah.
And how can they try it out?
Sure. You can download the authoring tool for free at liquidcinemavr.com. And if you want to basically publish and host it, go to 360flix.com, which is our company. It's a separate company that allows you to publish these kind of projects and then see it on different devices.
Okay, and what just real quick, what platforms are those?
You
devices?
really want me to miss my plane, right? So the platforms we cover are iOS, Android, Gear VR, Oculus Go, Quest to be added very soon.
Okay.
Apple TV. And we have players for Vive and Oculus, but we still have to connect them to our content management system.
Okay.
And I'm sure I've forgotten some platform.
Oh, I'm sure.
The web VR.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That old web thing.
Which will be very important.
The ancient web.
Yeah, that will be very important.
All right, Thomas, it's been a pleasure again. Yes,
all right,
thank you so much. And hopefully we can get some content to overlay into this interview. So
good. And
thank
I
you for
have
watching,
to run now.
everybody.